Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Jeja Flazanes, your producer and empowerment strategist. Thank you for downloading today's episode. Today, we're going to talk about Astrology for the Soul. For those of you that have been listening for a little while, you know this is one of my very favorite books written by Jan Spiller. But before we get to that today, I do want to give you the last hurrah, the last push. If you're on the fence, it's time to jump. In the next 2 weeks will be the last Manifestation Bootcamp. I would love to have you there. It will be life-changing. It will be epic, I promise, because it might be the last large event I do for a little while. So keeping that in mind, go to jejaflazanes.com/bootcamp if you need a different payment program or a personalized payment plan. I can help you with that, but you have to reach out to me. We can find you a roommate, and it will be recorded, and later I'll be offering it as a course for those of you that just can't travel or get this after the fact. But I just wanted to give you one last encouraging push to jump and join us. Be live. There's nothing better, and there's nothing that can replace what you experience. jejaflazanes.com/bootcamp. So today I'm interviewing Stephanie Shea. Stephanie is someone who works for Jan. Jan passed away years ago. So from 2012 to the mid-2016, Stephanie Shea had the great honor of working for and studying under internationally renowned astrologer Jan Spiller. Before Jan passed away in July 2016, she asked that her current staff, comprised of Stephanie and a few close friends and family members, continue to keep her website going in her honor. It is Stephanie's mission to do just that, as she writes the monthly horoscopes and other astrological forecasts for the website. Jan will always be an inspiration to Stephanie, and she treasures her many books, including New Moon Astrology, Astrology for the Soul, Cosmic Love, Spiritual Astrology, and the Astrology of Success. Enjoy today's episode. Welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So Jan Spiller is one of my favorite astrological authors. And funny enough, I only have one of her books. I have Astrology for the Soul, but I have felt like it has been such an amazing piece of work that I haven't really needed other books. And I'm not saying that her other books aren't as impactful, because I don't know that, and we'll talk about that. So I know that you have worked with Jan Spiller's organization for a long time. Why don't you tell people how you even got there? Like, how are you interested in astrology? How did you start working with Jan?
Yeah, sure. Well, I studied astrology here in Portland, Oregon, and I studied with an amazing teacher named Emily Trinkas. And at that time, Emily had been working with Jan for a while, helping her out on the website. And after some years of Emily doing that, she was ready to do different things and recommended me for the job. It was quite an honor, and it was a perfect fit because I have a journalism degree and I could write, and I was just reporting on the planets this time. And so that's kind of how it all started. Jan needed help with someone to do some horoscopes and other columns. She was pretty busy, as you might imagine, doing other things. So I was helping her out for about 4.5 years, and sadly, till the end of her life. And it was really a wonderful experience to get to work with her.
So I would be remiss to not ask a couple of very important questions for me and maybe the listeners. First of all, what is your true node?
It is the Aquarius North Node.
And your sun sign?
Aries.
And your rising?
Aries.
And your moon?
Capricorn.
Okay. And what was Jan's sun sign?
She was a Leo. Yes.
Okay. So Aries, Capricorn with Aquarius true node. So for those of you that have not worked with me personally, although I'm sure you've heard me recommend this during the show at some point, if you've been listening for a while, and if you've been to my live event, you've absolutely seen this book. Jan Spiller wrote a bunch of books, as you heard in the intro, but Astrology for the Soul it's on I have it downloaded on my iPad. So when I travel, I can be looking up people's true nodes. I use it in all the work that I do. I think it's such an important position. And one of the things that I really was sad to hear about, back in 2018, I did my first live event called Releasing What Weighs You Down. And I actually reached out to see if Jan would come speak at the event. And that's when I learned of her transition. Anything you can just tell us about her transition in terms of like how old she was, or if any parting words that she had or any sort of life lessons she had to impart?
Oh, she had a lot of lessons. And one thing, it's interesting, you asked, for age, she was always very private about that. She said, we can look at her chart, and I respect that. She didn't really want people to know about her age, but, we can say she had a transplanted liver, and that her family is really grateful for organ donors because that actually kept her alive a number of years longer than without that. And so, she had such a positive attitude on life, and just was working right to the end. And that's what she loved to do. And I interviewed a lot of family members after her passing. I wrote an article, just kind of an overview of the highlights of her life and career. And what everybody said across the board is how dedicated and hardworking she was. And, you could really see that working with her day to day.
How did you get interested in astrology in the first place?
I think I just had a curiosity about the bigger picture, what else is going on. And I kind of took the class for fun. Starting out, I thought, oh, this will just be for fun. And then the more I learned, and I really do credit Emily Trinkus's teaching style for just bringing the astrology into real life and seeing how practical it was. I've got that Capricorn moon. I have other Capricorn in my chart, and very earthy. And I felt like, yeah, this is not just for fun. This is actually stuff that you can use in a real way, and just kind of tap into when is a good time to do something. That can make all the difference.
How have you found astrology? So just piggybacking off of what you just said, changed your life or helped you make decisions, or ways that you can see how the information that you have influences your choices or even your results?
Yeah, this was a big thing. You mentioned Jan's book. I think you would love her New Moon Astrology book, because it's all about working with the moon cycles, and particularly setting intentions at the new moon about what you want to manifest. I'm really big into that. Again, it could be a Capricorn moon goal-oriented thing, but I think most people do like to set goals, and they have a list of things they really want to bring into their life. And the new moon is the best time to do that. And Jan goes into a lot of details, because it's not just the day of the new moon. There's a lot of specific timing that goes into it. And so I definitely follow the moon cycles, setting my intentions at every new moon. The solar eclipses are a big deal, high-powered new moons. And then when I see retrogrades or things like that, where maybe it's not the best time, I really will put certain activities on hold if possible. I'm pretty practical. Sometimes you have to do something, but if you have the choice, why not go with the astrology?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about, and I'm very excited to check out the new moon astrology. I do new moon circles. Either I follow them. I only led a few, but I normally have someone that I've worked with where I do new moon circles with, and definitely take in that energy of both new moon and full moon to do what is needed at that time, and hopefully acknowledge and harness the energy to activate and to release whatever is in our awareness at that time. When it comes to like Jan's work, and again, like I said, Astrology for the Soul, it was recommended to me many, many, many years ago. And I remember picking it up, and I have literally been studying astrology, not in a clinical, like structured way with any specific person, but I've just been noticing and asking questions and reading books and researching since about, 1996. And so, well, and probably even before that, because I've just taken a curiosity about it. And people know this on the show. I'm definitely not an astrologer. I don't claim to be, but I do teach an astrology class, and I teach it how I use it. And how I use it is to look at energies and how people's energies among things like how you deal with emotion, what your personality is, how you deal with communication, and and how those energies in relationships, both work and personal, interact with each other, and how people look at the world. I don't do planets. I don't do houses. I don't do predictions. I don't do any of that stuff because I'm not an astrologer. But I find I just sort of impart what I've learned and how I use it onto other people. But the one new planet, well, actually Mercury is my newest planet in the last, I think, 10 years. But prior to that, when I learned about the true node planet and I got that book, I literally remember having a fight or a conversation with my ex-husband where I had no idea how he got there from where we were. He was having a reaction to something. And I'm literally sitting there thinking, I have no idea what you're reacting to. I don't understand how you're thinking about this in order to have this reaction. And when I read the Astrology for the Soul book, and his true node is Libra, I literally saw a paragraph that answered the question. I was like, oh, that's what he's reacting to. Okay, cool. I got it. It wasn't me. It was this is part of his life lesson. And then same thing. So I'm a Sag true node, and it also answered some questions for me about how I am and what I'm doing and the lessons that I'm learning. And so I just felt like when it came to relationships, understanding someone's true node placement was so valuable for not taking things personally, for giving context, for seeing something that's not even you're not even aware of it. You can't even explain it. It's a past life thing. It's you don't even know where it's coming from. But that book just answered so many questions. And so for today's show, again, a lot of you have heard me talk about this book. If you don't already have it, you need to get it, Astrology for the Soul by Jan Speller. But one of the things I want to talk to you about today, having you work so closely with Jan for so long, I've never dug into the South Node. And I love to talk about the difference of the True Node versus the South Node, and then just take that conversation to what to do with that.
That sounds awesome. Yeah. And as you were speaking, I can't resist telling you about Jan's other book, Cosmic Love, because this will fill in even more puzzle pieces. This is kind of the follow-up or the companion to Astrology for the Soul, where she's talking about the nodes in context of relationship and what can hang you up and how to work with your partner better with the certain nodes. And she goes into some South Node stuff in this book too, especially in two people's charts. If somebody's planet is on the other person's South Node or North Node, these connections mean something. And a lot of times they would be a past life contract, and there's something to be worked out. So for South Node, that I think the common thing that people maybe misunderstand is, thinking it's a negative thing. So you're a Sagittarius North Node, you might think, oh, don't act like a Gemini or something, right? But actually, the South Node also contains gifts that you have brought in. I'm sure you remember that from Astrology for the Soul. Communication skills, for one. Here you are, you're doing a lot of communications, really good at it, and making connections. But then when you think about what to avoid and what might have hung you up, perhaps in a past lifetime with the South Node, it can be what we kind of call the out of balance traits of that sign. South Node really has to do with, there are some traits that you want to let go of. There's, when each sign is functioning, there's the highest expression, and then there's kind of the expression that is not helpful, let's say. So with Gemini, we'll use that as an example. And this would be in both Cosmic Love and Astrology for the Soul. Maybe getting too caught up in your head in the details and thinking you have to keep researching to before you can make a decision. Maybe you felt that.
Actually, Stephanie, hold on. Before you go on, I want to go back because I'm looking at my chart right now, and where do we even find the South Node?
Okay. Well, it depends on the software that you use, but it should be exactly opposite the North Node.
So Gemini is opposite Sag?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm a Gemini South Node. And then let's just go over what is so for instance, Mercury is about how you communicate, Venus is how you deal with love relationships. What is the North Node and what is the South Node?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, first of all, this is kind of good for people to know that the nodes are just points in the sky. They have to do with the moon's position when you were born and how the points intersect. I have a diagram. I'm a very visual person. But you can look it up kind of where these points are. So to me, it's amazing how significant it is, but it does have to do with the moon's position. So that's what they are. Symbolically, South Node are gifts that you bring in from a past life, as well as perhaps some unfinished business or tendencies that you need to let go of you might have been using a lot of that in a past life, but it's not scheduled to work for you this time. And the North Node is energy that will be more successful for you, that when you embrace the highest expression of that sign, whatever sign your node is in, it's going to lead you down a more successful path. And Jan did use the houses too. So knowing what house your North and South Node are in can be useful as well.
Okay, so can we speak a little bit about, I'm pretty up to date, not to mention I have literally Astrology for the Soul on my iPad. So I'm always looking up the tendencies to leave behind, the attributes to develop on the true node, on the North Node, which, by the way, everybody, true node is North Node. On the South Node, can we talk a little bit about, I mean, just for me, and again, everybody else can, whatever your South Node is the opposite of your North Node. So if I'm Gemini and just like, let's just play with, and I know you mentioned like, so some of the gifts you bring in from a past life and some of the tendencies to let go of, what would you say some of those would be?
Well, because you are Gemini South Node, when you see those bullet points in Astrology for the Soul that say tendencies to leave behind, those are the shadow Gemini traits, right? There's probably gossip in there. There's probably overthinking things, doing too many things at once. That is, she doesn't come out and say that's your South Node, but that's what those bullet points are. So the tendencies to leave behind. Gifts, natural gifts are also part of your South Node, right? So that's why the South Node isn't all bad. You don't want to think, don't do anything Gemini, because you're a natural communicator. I can tell you've got all these podcasts, you've written books, all of that is Gemini stuff. But the traits that are not helpful that she lists out to let go of, that's what you want to release from your South Node and realize maybe there's a different way. What's the opposite of Gemini? Oh, Sagittarius. That's the big picture. That's being sure of yourself, not having to research and think you never have enough information, right?
So there's not necessarily, I think I had heard somebody say that North Node was your, like where you're going, and South Node is where you've been. Like that the South Node was mostly past life, which is why I probably up until this conversation have never researched it or looked it up. Because while I'm aware of past lives, I've had Ainsley McLeod on the show a couple of times, and he's coming on again, and we talk a lot about past lives. At the same time, sometimes I think people use that as an excuse and don't do what they can in the moment of harnessing the power they have through law of attraction and quantum physics, like in this red hot moment. And so sometimes I'm not a fan of always looking backwards to make excuses for what's going on in my life today. How would you use, I use Astrology of the Soul all the time for North Node. So basically, would it just be flipped? So, if there was a book of South Node, would it say the exact same thing in opposite?
Kind of, yeah. Jan's putting all the South Node info in Astrology for the Soul. She's just not calling it out as that. But in that, when you start reading about you have a natural gift for XYZ, that's South Node. That's a gift from the past life. Or releasing the tendency to do X. That is South Node energy to be released. And so it is your past. That makes sense. Even in this lifetime, we have things from our past that shape who we are, and we can use some of it to our advantage. And some of it we don't ever want to repeat. So I think, it's just not called out that way because she wanted to really make people aware of the North Node energies. And the South Node is important for sure, but it's all wrapped in that book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there are, when you look at it, when I'm looking at a chart, like I'm looking at mine right now, and I'm looking at all the different planetary positions, I've over time kind of cultivated a use for a specific understanding of, let's say, 7 of them. And that's sort of what I taught in my astrology course, was the use of these 7 and how, like, for instance, I have, and I make stuff up. I channel, but I also make stuff up and I kind of call it new things. Like when it comes to astrology, I sort of teach the basics of the evolution from Aries to Pisces and it being a straight line versus a wheel, and like the calendar, and sort of the evolution of the embodiment of more complexities or layers of interpretation. And so most of my planets that I pay attention to are sort of in that third stage of the Sag, the Capricorn, the Pisces, the Aquarius, except my Venus. And for a long time, I had a situation with an ex-boyfriend who I didn't understand my impatience. And there are times it actually has happened in other relationships where I just want to know, and like yes or no. And I don't care what the answer is, but I find myself in this infant like temper tantrum, like I just need to know so I know how to proceed. And I couldn't figure that out. I was like, wait a minute, you're so gray. And like, I'm just all about the situation. So why are you so impatient in this one area? And I went back and looked at my chart and saw that my Venus was in Aries. And I was like, oh, okay. So if I'm looking at all the things that I've, again, had experience with that mean something to me, that shape my decisions, my relationships, my understanding, am I wanting to add South Node into it because it hasn't been thus far? Or does the North Node in astrology for the soul kind of do enough?
Well, I would look at South Node, and again, Cosmic Love will answer so many of your questions because she has a whole section in the back, especially like if you get in a relationship and you look at your 2 charts and you think, this person's Mars is conjunct my South Node. I wonder what that means. And it will talk about the things maybe that came from a past life that you 2 might need to work through together, and some tips for navigating that. So that's definitely a big piece of it. If you don't have planets conjunct the South Node, it's still kind of important, I think, because you'll know, oh, they're doing that South Node tendency, kind of like what you described with your ex-husband.
My partner, Doug, his true node and North Node is in Gemini. Okay. So we're opposites. And I didn't know that South Node was opposite North Node. I mean, of course I should know that by just, the planet, right? Like there are opposites on the Earth, points in our, in the universe, so to speak, but which makes complete sense. But I hadn't known that until right now. And I'm now thinking of how that, because I also know that when you look at sort of compatibility for some relationships, I know that Gemini Sag is a really good combination. Now he's also a Sagittarius sun sign. I'm a Pisces sun sign. And again, I know, like thinking back to, again, how I've taken in astrology for myself piece by piece, sort of looked at it, noticed it. What do you find is the most impactful way for people to use astrology in their own life, especially if they've sort of dabbled in it? Because here's where I get concerned, which is why, again, I kind of made my own course. I have seen clients in the past who have had readings, really, really extensive, like 3-hour astrology readings that come out of that, like being like, that was really cool, but they have no idea what to do with any of it. And they're so burnt out in their brain that I don't know how much of it's stuck. And I'm not saying that's what you would do, of course, or anybody else, because I look at astrology charts too. But I know sometimes when you get really deep in, you can go pretty deep and pretty long and pretty wide and pretty detailed. And I'm just curious as to how you would recommend someone who kind of wants to learn more, but doesn't want to be overwhelmed.
Yes, this is a big one. And I think keeping it's simple when you're learning. And even now, there's a lot of things out there in astrology that I don't even do. Just working with kind of the basic planets, houses, and node to me is like more than enough information. And I'll do a bunch of research on someone's chart. And then when we actually get in the reading, we may talk about a small percentage of that because that turns out to be what is the most pertinent. And so, sure, the information is there, But does it mean you have to have all of it? No. I mean, some people are going to have a very curious mind and they just want to know, and that's great. But for other people who just want the basics, I think sticking with like some personal planets is a really good place to start. Like what you were doing, sun, moon, rising, you could throw in Mercury, Mars, and Venus. That's going to tell you a bunch. And you can definitely look at just what are the elements. I notice you work with that, and I'm big on the elements. Just that alone can really be helpful. And Mercury is one of my favorites because it's communication. And so a lot of times that can help people gain a huge understanding, just that piece of it. Oh, that's how they might think about it. That's so different, you know? But then you don't have to take things personally because you realize how different everyone might actually think about something.
You actually just named all the planets. I do sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, ascendant, and true node. That's my 7 that I work with. But then I look at my chart, and again, been doing this for a while. I don't know what Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto mean. And I don't know that should I be concerned? Like, is there value in adding the other ones to the list?
I think they're very important, especially if they are near other planets or important points in your chart. That's one. And the other cool thing to know about is if there's going to be a current transit. You know, when is your Saturn returns? When will you have Uranus opposition? Some of the big stage of life transits, that's super cool to know about. So, but the outers tend to be more generational. Saturn, not as much because that's in a sign 2.5 years. But like Uranus is in a sign for 7 years. Pluto and Neptune are in their signs like forever, a long 10, 14 years. And so that's, you can kind of look at generations. I think, ooh, what is the Pluto and Capricorn generation like? That kind of thing. But as far as individual chart, you might have to see, well, where is that Pluto Capricorn falling in that person's chart? That's where the houses can be useful. So it depends how much you want to dig. Like you said, you don't have to learn the outer planets, but if you start getting curious about bigger phases of life, like if you did want to see, okay, what kind of cycles are going to be happening, that could be useful.
That's good to know. Yeah, I think that, again, because I'm thinking about all the past clients who've seen astrologers and had really in-depth, really long readings and felt overwhelmed and therefore paralyzed and not necessarily taking any of the information and using it. And I'm a big fan of like embodying the information and having it change you and do things differently versus just learning it and then just knowing it. Like if you don't live it, what's the point? You have an awareness about it, but if it doesn't change your interpretation or perspective on relationships or behavior or your own behavior, then I don't think it has as much value. And okay, so good. All right. So I think for me, I mean, definitely like that would be a cool thing to look at or have somebody help me look at. I don't know that I want to learn it. Maybe I'll reach out and we can have a session, but I like looking at cycles. I mean, I know I'm in one, which is probably why I'm like, okay, maybe I'm ready to look at that because I'm definitely in a new cycle. But I didn't need astrology to tell me that. I'm quite aware based on my own growth patterns and where I am and what's happening in my life. Like I know it, I feel it 100%. Like I'm on the verge of a pattern of a cycle I think I'm in the middle of it. I don't think I'm close to the end of it yet. Like I'm in that creation process. But so if anyone's listening to that, and I'm guessing that you do readings, Stephanie?
Oh, I do. I just love it. And they can email me. I've got the Stephanie@janspiller.com email, and I can talk about the different ones, but I do for individuals as well as couples or, people who maybe just want to look at their chart with their child or something like this. And yeah, I love to do it.
Let's talk about your work with Jan Spiller's company and what they offer like ongoing now that I know that everybody, the family is still working and keeping this going, which again, I can't stress enough that if I'm to recommend one book only, I think it's Astrology for the Soul, even though it only talks about the true node. But I think there's so much value in it it's such usable information. The rest of it for most people, it's like reading a horoscope. They think it could be random or apply to anybody. And I think the Astrology for the Soul is such a rich and intricately specific book for a person to really, I mean, each chapter is not, I mean, when it comes to True Node, I can't rattle off what the attributes are because it's so different than using astrology to me and the other planets, as I've noticed, because it's not I'm not seeing the pattern. So, unless now that you're saying it, though, the pattern, if the pattern is at the opposite, the tendencies to leave behind and the gifts are basically the South Node traits, then maybe that won't change the way I look at it. But can we talk about what, like if someone was to go to janspiller.com, besides to buy a book, what is offered there? What can I learn? What can I get? What can I do?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of content, which is why Jan needed help. And yeah, I think she designed all the articles, like very specifically. A lot of them go really well with her books. She's got heads up on the new moon, the best time to set intentions. A lot of the content is monthly subscription. That's how we have to keep ourselves up and running. But it's pretty low cost. There's a $4.99 and there's one that's $9.99. And you get articles, and when's the best time for the new moon, intention setting. You get a heads up about eclipses, retrogrades, a monthly overview of all the astrology. This was an article I took on. It used to be also in a magazine called Del Horoscope for years and years. And sadly, that magazine closed its doors a few years ago. But the article lives on. And this is an article that was Jan's brainchild, So it's like so much of her essence is still living in the site. We do have some free stuff too, which is great for people to just go dip their toe in. They can read their horoscope for free. They can get some full moon tips and information for free. But we really do encourage the membership because this is how we keep going. And Jan felt really strongly about keeping the site going as a resource because people were using it to help them in their lives.
Yeah, I know. I used to use a site, and even if I remember what it is, I won't share it because it's not like I'm going to say good things. There's a moment in time where sometimes, people, again, I'm going to use the idea of an abuse of information or a giving up power to information versus being empowered by information and having choice. I think back when I first moved to California from New York City and started my business, I almost looked at, there was another site that would kind of write out the entire next month of your birth sign. And I'm pretty sure it was just your sun. I don't remember. Of course, I'm sure they mentioned being influenced by different planets, but it was a big, long 3-page article, if you will, talking about like what to expect in the next coming month. And I found myself addicted to reading those at first to almost look for and wait for something good to happen. And after a while, I thought, I don't think this is good for me. I don't think this is good for me because I'm tuning myself to only look for one thing. And when it doesn't happen, then I'm upset about it. And it was almost like the prediction part of what people think astrology is about. And I didn't love that. So I stopped doing it. And I didn't think that was a good relationship to have with astrology. I have a very healthy relationship with astrology now because of how I use it in life and with relationships. So when you go to, and I definitely think there's a balance there. Can you speak to some of those articles and the information that Jan gives to, and then the way that we talk to people, the way that we engage people interested in astrology, because I do find there's that balance line of like, okay, I'm still the creator of my own reality and I still get to go decide what I'm going to attract and what I focus on and how I feel and how I interpret. Here are some influences that might affect me, but ultimately I'm not delegating or giving over all my power and waiting and sitting by the pool, like just looking at my watch, waiting for the horoscope to come true. How would you address that with what content Jan has on her site?
Oh yeah, this is a good one. First, Jan's tagline is empowerment on the spiritual path. So she uses the word empowerment right out there. And she also, I remember on one of her videos was saying, self-knowledge is power. And I love that take on it. She just really wants people to have more of the awareness, not just of the astrology that's out there, but of their own chart so that they can get a heads up and know, oh, I'm a Leo, there's a Leo full moon coming. This is a time when people's emotions are heightened. Maybe if something feels dramatic on this full moon, I should take that into account and reconsider things a few days later. Like using it in that way instead of thinking, oh no, the full moon's coming. Actually, that's fine. If you know it's coming and it might be emotional, maybe you just kind of relax and don't make a bunch of plans around that time. So I think she's always angling for people to just take practical action. Another article she designed was called the Astrological Weather Report, which I love. That's just so practical. Like, oh, what's it like out today? Oh, it sounds like during these hours, conversations won't flow as well. So maybe I'll make that phone call at 3 o'clock instead. And I haven't always seen astrology use that practically. Jan had a lot of Virgo in her chart, even though she was a Leo. She was Virgo rising. She had several Virgo planets. And you can really see that. She takes the mystery out of a lot of it, and just says, here's what's happening. Here's what the weather is like.
Do you know Jan's moon?
Yes, she was a Pisces moon.
Okay. My listeners have heard me, and it's not, everyone don't get offended, talk about Virgo moons. So I'm sure somebody was waiting to hear what her moon was and if it was going to be Virgo. Anyway, because I talk a lot, just I share experiences. Although Brittany, I'll give shout out to Brittany, who's in my empowerment strategist beta certification group. And she's definitely helping me to understand and reshape some of what's possible in that. So, okay, Jan was a Leo with a Virgo rising and a Pisces moon. I love that combo. And yes, again, I found her work to be, it resonated with me. It's definitely in Astrology for the Soul in terms of understanding the planet and kind of what to do with it. I never felt it was, like, again, how some people use even just like going to a psychic or going to there's a balance of, we want to empower people. And that's what I want people to understand. I think that we can go too extreme and give power over to and think that we're being controlled by. And it's like, no, this is just influences. You still have control. But when you understand the influences, now you have power and knowledge, like you said, to make different choices or to be compassionate for yourself or to balance or rebalance what's going on. So any last ideas or concepts you want to share with people? We're going to tell you where to go. It's janspiller.com. Again, the link will be in the show notes, but that's Jan Spiller, Spiller, janspiller.com. And you can learn more about the membership to get more information there. She's got a bunch of books, which you did hear me talk about in the beginning of the show when I introduced Stephanie. And any other concepts you want people to know about the difference between Jan's work and other people's work, like what they're going to learn when they get her books, when they join the membership. And of course, then we'll also have your email address, Stephanie, for if anyone's interested in having a reading with you, which I believe is your cardinalfireastrology@gmail.com.
That's a good one too. Yes, they can definitely use that, or Stephanie@janspiller.com. Either one goes to the same place.
Okay, Stephanie@janspiller.com. But anyway, so any last sort of like tying it in a nice neat bow about Jan Spiller's work, point of view, and use of astrology?
Well, I would say that, Jan really liked to make the most of whatever is going on. So there's going to be times and transits with challenges. And, we didn't talk global astrology, but I will verify that 2020's astrology was as weird as the year. And so knowing these things are coming around, they come through life. The more tools, that you can have to see maybe a bigger picture and also to see the cycles and realize that each cycle does have an end date, that can really, just that fact can help people when they might be going through a difficult time to realize this is not always, the planets are always in motion. So just like the fortunate times happen and then they're not always going to happen, then there's some times where a challenge comes along, but you can always see the next cycle coming along. So I find that really, really useful because I think it's hard when people think that nothing is going to change. And astrology is always changing.
Yeah, it's an important point to make. And again, I think the point of here's what's happening, here's what's possible, here's what might shift as an awareness, but that shouldn't necessarily dictate that you succumb to that. You're just aware that it's there. It's like if you go outside and you see the weather report and says it's going to rain and you don't take a jacket, and then you're standing in the rain, we're like, oh yeah, well, the weather report said it was going to rain and I didn't take a jacket. So, okay, it's on me now that I'm wet. But like, it doesn't mean you don't go outside. It doesn't mean you don't do whatever you're going to do. It just means you're not as prepared as if had you paid attention to it, right?
Correct. And it probably won't rain for 100 days straight. So you have some chance to think about other weather. I love her weather analogy. And her other analogy was, she lived in California too, by the way. She had actually lived in New York and California. And she said, the timing of astrology is a lot like surfing, because obviously you don't go out there if there's not waves. So knowing when is the good time to do something and when not to.
Makes perfect sense. All right. Stephanie, thank you so much for coming on and not only representing Jan Spiller and the work of her and her books, but also sharing with us your story and what you do with people with astrology. Again, if you're interested in a reading with Stephanie, you can go to stephanie@janspiller.com, and that link will be in the show notes. And any other last words of wisdom?
Oh, wow. I'm just really grateful you had me on the show. I know that Jan really, just wanted to keep this going. Her books are kind of like her gift to planet. They'll be here. And I'm excited that younger generations are now discovering the books, and that, I've gone into bookstores and seen that Astrology for the Soul is still on the bestseller list. And that just warms my heart that I feel like Jan is still very much with us. And so, you can still kind of get her guidance through the books. And another thing to mention on the website is there's still a few articles about equinox and solstice that doesn't change over time, that is still in her words. So that's one way to still stay connected.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for coming on the show.
Thank you, JJ.